Your next speaking project, which is due a week from now, is an informative speech. So let's talk today about what informative speaking is and the types of informative speeches you can do. An informative speech is a speech designed to convey knowledge and understanding. In the informative speech, you're the teacher. You are there not with any kind of personal bias, but to share knowledge and information with your audience. Informative speaking occurs all the time in daily life. A manager explains next year's budget to his staff. A teacher outlines a subject in a lecture. Your pastor or church leader outlines a program that they are undertaking or a missions trip they are planning. Anytime a speaker stands up before an audience to convey information, that's informative speaking. But there are several different types of speeches that you can give. You can deliver a speech about an object. Our textbook defines an object as anything that is visible, tangible, and stable. Now, as it's used in this context, virtually anything can be an object. It can be a place. If you wanted to do a speech on the Eiffel Tower, that's a speech about an object. If you wanted to talk about the world of Legos, that would be an object. If you wanted to talk about an individual, if you wanted to do a speech about Susan B. Anthony or George Armstrong Custer or Robert E. Lee, those are all speeches about objects. Now, depending on the purpose of your speech, the specific purpose of your speech, the general purpose obviously is to inform, but depending on the specific purpose of your speech about an object, that will determine the kind of organizational patterns you use. For instance, if you wanted to discuss the evolution of an object, how something came to be the way it is. For instance, if you wanted to give us the history of the Eiffel Tower, then you would organize your speech in a chronological manner. Talk about the main features of an object. Like the Mississippi River, if you wanted to talk about the upper Mississippi, the middle Mississippi, and the lower Mississippi, then you would take a spatial organization. You're following a direction. The other very common organizational method for speeches about objects is a topical organization, where you are just dividing the material into standard subtopics that are consistent with one another. Whichever organizational method you use, make sure that you follow the guidelines that we talked about when organizing the body of the speech. Make sure that you stay with only 3 to 5 main points. Make sure to keep those main points separate. Try to keep them worded in a similar structure, and balance the amount of time devoted to each in the body of your speech. You can also do a speech about a process, a systematic series of actions that leads to a specific result or product. In other words, you're going to tell us how to do something. And because of the very nature of speeches on processes, it is going to be in a chronological nature. You do this, then you do this, then you do this. But it becomes even more important to adequately and carefully organize your speech on a process, because you are giving directions that you anticipate someone will follow to produce the same result or product that you're describing. And so that needs to be organized in a very easily accessible, easily digestible manner. You can do a speech about an event. Events are anything that happen or are regarded to be happening or have happened. And just as in all the other speeches, how you organize this speech about an event is determined by your specific purpose. If your purpose is to explain the history of the event or to explain what occurs during the course of an event, then you are probably going to be employing the chronological organization method. If you are talking about any other aspect of an event, you're probably going to be using the topical organization method. Again, though, remember to follow the points that we mentioned earlier. 3 to 5 subpoints. Make sure the subpoints are balanced. Try to keep them worded similarly. Make sure that you keep them all separate. Perhaps the most difficult of the speeches to inform is a speech about a concept. A concept is a belief, a theory, an idea, notion, principle, or the like. In other words, they are speeches about abstract ideas. And so therefore, describing and explaining them can be a little tricky. Again, it could differ depending on your specific purpose, but speeches about concepts are almost always organized topically. Whenever you're talking about these abstract concepts, you need to be very careful that, first of all, you define your terms clearly. Use language that isn't too technical for your audience. Make sure it's language they're going to understand and comprehend. And make sure to use examples or comparisons to make that abstract concept relatable, something that your audience can recognize and accept. I want to share with you some guidelines for the informative speech. First, don't overestimate what your audience knows. Every sport, every hobby, every branch of knowledge has its own specific language, its own specific nomenclature. And to someone who is familiar with that topic, these terms, these names, these concepts can be very, very understandable. But you take someone who doesn't know them, and it's a different story altogether. There are plenty of terms in golf and in sport, in football and tennis, that to a tennis player or a golfer or a football player are very common. But when you are not familiar with that sport, you might not know the nomenclature. Just like in theater, there are terms that are very specific to my discipline that I teach that are second nature to me. But if I were to start using those terms in a conversation, you might not understand what they mean. And so don't assume that your audience knows what you're talking about. Break it down and put it in concepts they can understand. Next, you need to relate the subject directly to your audience. We talked about this in the introduction of the speech, but if you're doing an informative speech, you need to do it throughout the body of the speech. Constantly be bringing it back to your audience. Why is this important to you? Why do you need to be listening to my speech? How could this affect you? Always avoid abstractions. Dr. Joseph Conrad said that it was his job as an author to make the audience see. I know as a storyteller and as an actor, I think of what my job to do is making people see the things I'm talking about. And as communicators, we deal with the same things in our speeches. We don't want them to see abstractions. We want them to see specifically what we have in mind. And so the way to do this, the way to avoid abstractions, is to be specific and to be descriptive. Fill your speech with terms and language that make the audience see what you're trying to talk to them. One of the most popular ways that this can be used in speaking is to compare and contrast things. When you compare, you talk about the likenesses between two objects. When you contrast, you talk about the differences. And so this is a very, very good way to avoid abstractions, to be specific. Tell us the differences. Tell us how things are the same. Next, you need to personalize your ideas. You need to make them relatable to your audience. You need to personalize your topic. You need to address the things about it that give it humanity, that make it appeal to your listeners. That's the way to keep them involved. Finally, be creative. What's going to make your speech stick in the mind of your audience? What's going to give it lasting impact is the way that you creatively communicate the material to your audience. So look for creative things you can do. Anecdotes, stories, quotations, other things that will bring it to life, that will give it a dramatic flourish. So quickly, let's summarize. You are going to be doing a speech to inform. A speech to inform can be about an object, an event, a process, or a concept. Those speeches will be organized based on what your specific purpose is. And so you've got to determine that purpose and then organize your speech accordingly. When you do that, make sure to personalize it. Make sure to avoid abstract. Don't assume that your audience knows too much. Don't be too technical. And above all else, be creative. Find a new, different way to communicate the topic that you want to discuss with your audience. All right, guys, that's it. Hope you have enjoyed the lecture, and I will see you later. Bye.